Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you all this evening. It's good to see so many of you here in the chat. Sorry for the couple second delay. One of the comrades that's going to be, well, a couple minute, one of the comrades that's going to be joining us is joining from Gaza, and we had a little bit of the, the time change, just messed us up a little bit, but we're all set. We're ready to go and excited. Just going to say a couple things up front. So we're going to interview folks from the Coalition for the Elimination of Imperialism in Africa. They're going to discuss the escalating situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we'll be talking about that, geopolitical effects. We'll also hopefully get to talk a little bit about developments in the Sahel region and just, other things Pan-African, and so I think that's great. I didn't plan it this way, but today obviously is Walter Rodney's. He would have been 83 today if he was not assassinated by imperialist forces. So, it's a fitting day to have a conversation like this. And yeah, so our guests, Obi Ohia is a member of the Coalition for the Elimination of Imperialism in Africa and an organizer with the Movement for African Emancipation, which is a formation based in Nigeria. Libre ex Sankara is another member of the coalition and is an Afro-Boricua cultural worker and doula who engages youth in international proletarian struggle, currently is based in the Gaza Strip of Palestine, where the Zionists recently struck another hospital with a U.S. bomb. And so hopefully that connection will remain stable, but I'm just really, honored to have these comrades to welcome to the show. So come on up, folks, and we'll get into this discussion. It's good to be with you both today.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It's an honor. So welcome. Before we get started, maybe you each could just take a brief moment and introduce yourselves to our audience a little bit more than what I just laid out and talk a little bit about some of the organizing that you both are a part of. Obi, you could start us off just because you're next on my screen.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Obi. I'm based in Baltimore area. So the, coalition is one of the main organizing I do. I also work with the Black Alliance for Peace out here and the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So really, most of my organizing is focused on Pan-African struggles against imperialism. And I think that's also why I'm very interested in following these topics.
Right on. Yeah, Libre, go ahead.
Peace, comrades. Libre, part of the coalition as well. I'm building Pan-Africanism, also part of building Pan-Caribbean alliances, and we'll talk about this later, right? But there's we need to organize in the diaspora as well as in the motherland, and doing various. I'm a cultural worker, so outside of being here as a humanitarian worker, also archiving and documenting what is this genocide, which is one of many. There's a genocide in Congo happening. And so super excited to be on here and to talk about building against imperialism and why we all should be actively involved in what is solidarity and action, not just a word, right? So look forward to diving into that with everyone.
I'm muted now. Awesome. So let's get into the primary topic that we, was the impetus for us having this particular discussion, which was to talk about what's going on in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There's been some important developments there recently. I think just to start, we could start with kind of a recent news event, and then you all can use that to, add context, go back, and we can talk about, some more recent history or even a little bit further back if you want. But, there's this recent news item that the president there in the Congo reportedly was offering up a deal to President Donald Trump, we can get the booze in the chat. It is being presented as a security pact, which would offer up access in exchange for a bunch of the Congo's mineral resources, access to those. It would offer those in exchange for military support, military aid. What should people understand about this proposal? And can you explain this a little bit of the context that you think this proposal is coming out of?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so overall, the greater context of this is still neocolonialism. So that's when a country might appear independent, but its economic system and therefore its political and military systems and all these systems are still controlled by external actors. So here that would be the imperialists led by the US. So in that sense, this proposal was actually came out of a Congolese senator contacted some lobbyists in the US to try and bring this proposal about. And so since then it's been picked up by President Tshisekedi, and he's talking with Donald Trump. I mean, so one of the things to remember is that in this entire process, none of this came from the people. It wasn't, the people of Congo aren't saying that they want to exchange their future for some weapons from the US, right? So this is, in this sense, the neocolonial actors here are just using this as an excuse to enrich their pockets while selling the future of Congo. So instead of actually doing something that would lead to the development of Congo, lead to the improvement of the lives of many people in Congo, I mean, we always talk about how wealthy the Congo is. They'd rather just do this deal for a supposed security pact, where it doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's kind of in the same vein as what the US, what they're trying to do with the Libre corridor. So the Libre corridor was, it was first built in 1902. It was a railway that ran from DRC and it will in the future run from Zambia as well, to the Libre port in Angola. And it was really just a way to facilitate the exploitation of Congolese minerals for the West, right? So the idea of reviving this is really just to fast track the exploitation of the minerals, to send the wealth of Congo once again to the West so that they can declare this new war on China. I mean, so it doesn't really make sense, especially when you think about Rwanda. So this war or this genocide is being led by M23, the March 23 movement. And they are fully Rwandan backed, and also there are reports of Rwanda military also being active participants in their march on the eastern part of Congo. The eastern part of Congo is where a lot of the mineral wealth is kept. So in this sense, Rwanda is really a darling of the West, or I should say Kagame is really a darling of the West. He came to power after the Rwandan genocide, which killed both Tutsis and Hutus in the genocide. And since then, Rwanda, Uganda have been launching these wars of aggression, either fully, but usually they back different rebel groups, to be able to plunder Congolese resources for the West again. So in terms of a security pact, this really doesn't make sense. Rwanda, M23 is well equipped because of Rwanda. Rwanda is well equipped because of the West. The European Union is still sending weapons to Rwanda because of Rwanda's quote unquote peacekeeping efforts in Mozambique, which is once again Rwanda going to secure resources for the behest of the West. Rwanda's really been used as a attack dog of the imperialists. They also recently sent troops to Haiti. So in this sense, this idea of the US is going to somehow help protect the Congolese people when the US is actually the one who's been unleashing the violence at the end of the day, it really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, Libre, did you want to add some stuff on that?
Just a small thing, and just for people to understand, the project is a railway, and if we're thinking about the type of infrastructure that a country like Congo needs, it doesn't need a railway to move cobalt and copper, right? That's an imperialist project. And just to show the face, right? We're talking about Walter Rodney, right? The underdevelopment of Africa. And how does the underdevelopment of Africa happen? Well, it boosts foreign interests to push projects that allow for the over-exploitation of our people. And the Congo, I mean, we have to realize 70% of cobalt is coming out of the Congo, right? It has some of the largest copper reserves. So we're not talking about a poor country. We're talking about an intentionally developmentally stagnated country that is intentionally being exploited. And there are foreign interests that want to continue to push the genocide that is happening, to continue to destabilize so that they can push projects like this. And for people that are interested and that claim to support the environment, this is a huge environmentally unstable project. Capitalism has no interest in long-term sustainability or what is best, not only for workers but for the planet. And so the project being proposed is one that will very much hurts the natural environment, causing and exacerbating climate change, which the global South tends to be the recipient of all the negative things that come out of climate change. And so this railway in no way is intended to or actually benefits the actual Congolese working class people. So this has nothing to do with the people and everything to do with private interests. So we should be pushing back on this on multiple levels, and continuing to raise our voice and just call out the red flags. Colonization is not creative. They're doing the same thing that they've always done. They're just using different names, and there are different external foreign factors.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it strikes me too, like we're reading Samir Amin right now, doing a study group and reading Samir Amin Accumulation on a World Scale. And obviously one of the concepts that Samir Amin talks about is disarticulation of economies in the global South or the third world. And, this is, again, it connects very much to also Walter Rodney thinking about underdevelopment as a process too. But just to give folks an idea, I think Democratic Republic of Congo is like such a prime example of this, of disarticulation. The economy of the Congo is not set up to support the people and the development of the Congo, right? It's set up to get these really high value resources out of them and to the core, right? To the global north, to Europe and to the United States. And so it's obviously a prime example of that. One of the things that happens, I think, that makes it a little bit challenging sometimes to talk about the Congo for some folks. It shouldn't be a challenge, but I think it does create a challenge for folks in the way that I just think that we have difficulty sometimes talking about proxy wars and things like this, right? And the language that gets used often is like, there are ethnic conflicts, or there's this, conflict between certain Rwandan forces and Congolese forces and so on, right? And so they're treated as kind of internecine, right? Or within, this is, groups of African people, kind of fighting each other that are maybe seen also as outside of the state, right? Seen as like, gangs or things like this, right? And so then people have a hard time, I think, then really seeing clearly, even though we should be able to, about the kind of imperial authorship and the sort of design here, even though, as you all laid it out, I think, it's it's quite clear. We have to look at who benefits from this situation and where are the resources going and so what have you found effective in terms of breaking people out of that kind of thinking or discussion about something like the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Yeah, I can start, and Libre, obviously. So I think one of the important things that we need to remember and get people to think about is that all of this is happening in the framework of imperialism, right? So imperialism, capitalism always tries to obscure the forces at play. We know this when the way we get exploited at work, but it hardly feels like we're, maybe not hardly, but it doesn't feel as much as we're being exploited at work, just because we don't actually see the money leaving our hands. In the same manner, um, if we try and look too much into weeds, we might get caught up about this person or these forces or that forces and some of the particularities of the situation. I find it helpful if we kind of start at the framework of imperialism, understanding that imperialism likes to strike up these conflicts, likes to create this division so that it's easier to exploit and control populations and areas for the wealth of a few. When you start looking at it in terms of imperialist framework, then you can start aligning like where the different pieces go within this framework. So even though we might be talking about ethnic groups, we might be talking about neighboring countries, we still know that the alignment is still there to benefit the imperialists. So the whatever other tensions that are there, there still might be tensions outside of imperialism. The other thing to remember is a lot of these tensions have like their history is rooted in colonialism. It's not like these are a lot of them, especially how intense they are. It's not like these are ancient ancient conflicts that date back to the beginning of time. Colonialism stoked these conflicts in order to rule. Imperialism is doing the same, as Libre said. There's a small playbook. So I think if we look at it in terms of imperialism, if we think about these conflicts as just for who's to gain, the people who gain, it's not the individuals, it's not the local people who are fleeing, who are dying, who might even be dragged into the killing. At the end of the day, the benefits are the imperialists, the wealthy elites, the large groups like BlackRock, Vanguard, these like larger investment places. So I think we should maybe just focus on who's benefiting, who's being hurt, and look at cleavages due to imperialism.
Yeah, and to add on to what the comrade is saying, I think we follow the money, right? And if we do that, we understand that Rwanda and Apple, the company Apple, are playing active roles in financing the M23 rebels that are actively sorry, bomb just went off. That are actively destabilizing the DRC. And something else that we have to understand that is that the crux of imperialism is divide and conquer tactics. Yes, there are different ethnic groups. Are these differences going to be used to create wars in the imperialist and capitalist context? You want to create division as much as possible so that you can distract people while you steal the resources. And the resources being stolen, right? So Apple and Rwanda are actively helping to fund the M23 movement so that they can extract the cobalt, so that they can build the computer, the batteries that are going into computers, that are going into phones, and they can make these ridiculously high return on investments for them as people, while destabilizing a whole country and leaving millions of people without economic stability or development. So the best way to view this is the divide and conquer tactics being used to exploit and distract people. throw some weird foreign factors into play to distract people, use the Western media to control the narrative and say that the Congolese people are the reason why there's a problem in the Congo, right? And they're not going to talk about the fact that despite the Congolese people reaching out to the UN and other foreign nations for intervention, for help, they've received none. So they're being ignored by other nation states, intentionally so, and this allows for them to continue to be exploited, and somehow that makes them the problem, right? And so we have to be very careful. And if we follow the money, and if we see what's not being done intentionally, so we understand that this is very much a proxy war being funded by private investors from Apple and Rwanda, who stands to benefit, not the country, right? Specifically the president of Rwanda. And so hopefully that creates a little bit of a visual for folks.
Yeah, thank you. I can't help but be affected by the fact that, a bomb just went off in the background, as you're still breaking all of that down. Um, I'm gonna shift to a question actually that can allow us to talk about that a little bit, which is something that somebody in the audience asked, which is, Comrade Libre, since you're working in Gaza right now, can you explain the importance of connecting anti-imperialist liberation struggles in Sahel and Palestine, especially in this moment? Yeah, I mean, I know that you're getting this on the fly, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, the root cause is imperialism. Zionism comes out of imperialism for the same reasons imperialism still has a stronghold in the U.S. I'm Afro-Caribbean, right? I'm from Borinquen, a country, the so-called oldest colony in the world that the U.S. invaded. And this is the same government that, not surprisingly, while illegally occupying Turtle Island, invading my country, occupying my country for 127 years, not surprisingly, is going to be the one that is funding the forced displacement and the illegal occupation of Palestine. And so anti-imperialism pushes back, right? Because in order to combat capitalism, you can't use conscious capitalism, right? There's no good way to exploit people. It doesn't exist. Philanthropy, all of that, throw it out the door. It does not work. We need anti-imperialism and anti-imperialist struggle. And if we understand that the way forward is by using this, we understand that what is intentionally being done in Gaza, in all of Palestine, this continued ongoing genocide that is being funded is a picture of the end goal of imperialism, the thing that we're trying to fight against. So by using U.S. tax dollars to fund and kill people and genocide people in Palestine, instead of improving education, instead of investing in infrastructure, instead of helping to improve the quality of life of people in occupied Turtle Island, it's choosing to kill people. And so we have to understand that there is no moral basis for the existence of the U.S. government or the Zionist government. And if we're looking to connect all of these things, we have to understand that there are 3 genocides that have been happening for over 3 decades. And right now we're talking about Gaza in Palestine, but there's also the silent genocide, Congo, that a lot of people do not talk about, and Sudan, right? So it's not surprising that there are multiple genocides simultaneously happening, all under and for imperialism and exploitation. And how does this connect to the Sahel? Well, and we'll talk about this more in some of the other questions, right? But I would make the argument that the Sahel is our modern day version not only of building a Pan-Africanist project to unite Africa, but an anti-imperialist project that is pushing towards sovereignty in tangible ways to dismantle imperialism and focus on a people-centered approach to developing a country that then becomes a bigger thing, right? Because the Sahel is forming a confederation of Sahelian states, and so we see this kind of natural building up towards anti-imperialism, so that we can stop this vicious cycle of exploitation that creates the conditions for something so volatile like Zionism to even exist and to be funded, well funded, at the expense of working class people. And so at the crux of everything, we must fight against imperialism, because it's the enemy to all of us, whichever region in the world that we find ourselves. I just named some examples of how that is playing out today.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the formation of your organization. I understand it was formed at least in part, or maybe because of the developments in the Sahel region in the last few years, and a need to create organizations in defense of the Alliance of Sahel states. Share a little bit about the formation of your coalition, if you would.
I'll start out, and then Obi can jump in. The organization kind of started to gain some traction. I think most notably when sanctions were being imposed on Niger. Western media outlets were becoming hyper-focused on demonizing these people-backed military coups that again were very well received by the masses of people in the Sahel. And working with comrades from the Movement for the Emancipation of Africa, as well as knowing our comrades from the Thomas Sankara Center in Burkina Faso, connecting with a comrade in Niger that I met on a delegation in Cuba. Some of these things happened by chance. I wasn't expecting to meet a comrade from Niger in Cuba. When the sanctions went into effect, reach out to them, right? And so it's like, what do we do? And how do we support? And so we began reaching out to different Pan-Africanist spaces that we thought would help us to support the Sahelian revolutions, combat sanctions imposed by the Western-backed ECOWAS, and do our best to uplift what was happening. So we started to understand the need to support what has now become the Alliance of Sahelian States. But in discussing it, we were like, okay, but in its essence, we also want to support Pan-Africanism, because what is being done in the Sahel region is part of a larger project at the unification of Africa. And also, as Pan-Africanists, right, understanding that we're trying to build socialism with African characteristics. And so our motherland has been overexploited by capitalist projects. We've been forced, some of us have been forced from the homeland. Resistance, not surprisingly, continues to be demonized through divide and conquer methods. And so we wanted to use as a foundation moving towards building a united Africa under Pan-Africanism, as Africans in Africa in the diaspora, And thankfully, and maybe Obi could speak to this as well, we were able to send a delegation. The coalition was able to send a delegation actually to the AES to better understand what's happening in the active building of this Pan-Africanist project. And it's important to note that we're multilingual and that we're not going to make information only available in English, knowing that that the people that we're trying to reach speak different languages, French, English, Spanish. And so, trying to organize at home and abroad against imperialism towards building a socialist and united Africa.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on just a little bit. I mean, so one of the reasons why we quickly gained speed was when there was threats of actually invading Niger after the popular coup in Niger. I mean, I think one of the things just to keep in mind is that wherever you are, you can still do something, right? You do something through organization. You do something by also, in our case, we were able to connect with people on the ground and moving resources to people on the ground. Part of the delegation wasn't just to go. We also raised funds to give to the general funds of each of the 3 countries of now what's the Confederation and what will soon be the Federation of Sahelian States, right? So we also, as an organization, we've raised funds to support our comrades on the ground in their projects that are going forward. One of the things that the diaspora can do, since we're not necessarily on the front lines of the struggles there, we're often in the belly of the beast, or at least near it, is to really move resources to organizers on the ground, and also to share the analysis and the news of what's going on from organizers on the ground. So I think it's just really important that in any formation as we're moving, we should always keep an international perspective, have an international mindset, even if we're just acting locally, because we are an international majority, right? Like, our strength is always in the international scene. Historically, a lot of our movements have not been just confined within the lines drawn by imperialists or the borders. We've always been working together. The 5th Pan-African Conference was a conference where organizers from all over were coming together. If we think about movements in the US, they've always been linked to Africa, to the Global South, revolutionary movements, and I think that's a tradition we should continue.
Right on. And I just want to say too, somebody mentioned that the folks can read the Declaration in Defense of the AES. I imagine I put a ton of links in the show description of, your organization, link trees, all of that stuff. So I imagine, folks, if you make your way to the show description, you'll be able to find all those resources, as well as different ways to support the work that you all are doing. So encourage folks to do that as well. So let's talk a little bit about where things kind of stand, with the Alliance of Sahel States. What do you see as the challenges, and as well as like some of the opportunities? What are some of the things that, this alliance is confronting at this moment that obviously present, real challenges, and where do you see the possibilities or the opportunities for this movement?
Yeah, I'll start with the challenges and then go to opportunities and some of the things happening. In terms of challenges, I mean, there have been intentional attacks on Pan-African media outlets that are uplifting what has been happening in the Sahel, most notably African Stream, right? Literally attacked by the State Department, and so it's hard to amplify what's happening when we don't have enough outlets, and when the Western media outlets that do exist are going to try to paint the picture that what is happening is bad, without any real analysis of what has been happening and why, right? Why are people backing these military coups? I mean, quite literally assassination attempts. I believe at this point, Captain Ibrahim Traore has survived 17 assassination attempts by foreign interests. The Alliance of Sahelian States has actively been kicking out the colonizers, and in doing so, for example, as they started to kick them out, the French, not surprisingly, released some of the members of terrorist groups that they were supposedly there to stop from destabilizing the Sahel. So after the French got kicked out, they let these people out and said, you know, do whatever you want to do, which shows the intention of the foreign interests. And so there are deliberate attempts at destabilization that are happening within the AES to try to push some internal contradictions to overthrow what is a people's movement. And in terms of opportunities, I mean, we again, in my opinion, the Alliance of Sahelian States is something that everybody should be actively studying, as it's arguably the best example of anti-imperialist struggle in our modern day time. The Alliance of Sahelian States has been able to kick out colonizers, begin to invest in education and hospital infrastructure, nationalizing mines, so taking back control of resources in the country, to redistribute it within the country for the workers instead of these foreign interests. Most notably, Mali. I mean, they took the mining company to court and held the CEO until they agreed to pay back the taxes that they owed to the Mali government, as well as they seized the mines. Captain Ibrahim Traore has championed the building of 2 tomato processing plants, built a second cotton processing plant, and increased the crop production by investing in farm workers and in agriculture. Niger has also been actively investing in the agricultural sector to combat sanctions by providing farmers with tractors, irrigation pumps, and subsidized fertilizers. And in fact, Niger made a decision to ban the export of their crops outside of the AES in efforts to intentionally ensure that the prices of goods within the AES are stable. So we're seeing movements away from foreign aid and towards food sovereignty, which is a key pillar of any nation that is trying to build independence. And these are just some of the many things that these nations have done. And just in the spirit of Thomas Sankara, right, who fought against IMF loans, right? We're seeing that happen again. So this reinvigoration of Pan-Africanism, we see the spirit of it coming out through these leaders in the Sahel. And Thomas Sankara said, you can whoever feeds you controls you. And so we see that in the Sahel, they're actively trying to ensure that they're able to provide for their people so that they can avoid not only IMF loans, but foreign interests and foreign factors to continue building and unifying. And they have been making active calls for other nations to join the alliance. And so we're seeing a domino effect, though we do have to be careful for the liberal aspects of some of it. But they're creating a new precedent in Africa, and it's one that is noted when you see people like Ibrahim Traore going to Ghana and getting more cheers than the president of the country himself, right? So people love what is being built because it's for the people, and Africans are recognizing this, and I think soon we'll be demanding the fruits of what we're seeing come out of the Sahel in their own countries. And so we can hope that this continues to spread.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Obi.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, especially to the last part about spreading. Like the AES really does serve as a current model of what it means for Pan-African development. So we have 3 countries who, like, if you ask the Western imperialists, these are supposed to be some of the poorest countries in Africa. But we see when they're united, when they work together, when they mobilize the masses of people, because even though we love our leaders, we love their speeches, we love what they do, but the core of the AES is the masses of people. Those leaders in place, they're just really doing what the masses, they're carrying out the aspiration of the masses. The idea of forming the AES wasn't the 3 leaders who came together. It was the masses who were demanding, we want unity. The masses were demanding, we want the colonists out. They were demanding that we want our resources to be used to better our people. We want security. So I think, one, it really shows I think the AES really shows what does it mean to have a democracy, which is kind of counter to all these narratives you have about, if you have elections, you have democracy, which is a farce. What we're really seeing is a nation that is what happens when the government of a nation is carrying out the wishes of the people. And that's absolutely a model for the rest of Africa. And the neocolonialists notice. So, for example, in Nigeria, the latest round of protests, people, especially in the north, were seen carrying Russian flags. Why were they carrying it? Because they understood what was going on in the AES. They understood that they want to carry out similar reforms. And now in Nigeria, it's almost to the point where the government knows that the Nigerians are looking at the AES and seeing what's going on. And the government is trying to crack down on it. But it's really just really like the model of Pan-Africanism of our time.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd love to bring you back to have more conversation on Nigeria another time too. So let's see, where do I want to go next? We have a couple good questions from the chat. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about neocolonialism too, because I think that it's something that is pretty well understood among those of us who are anti-imperialists of a certain stripe. But I think it's still one of those strategies that can be challenging to organize against. And maybe we're seeing a shift in terms of looking at movements like those in the Alliance of Sahel states and so on. But I even think that often in the U.S. contexts, what we sometimes call neoliberal, that this takes a lot of like neocolonial kind of characteristics as well. And so what do you see as the key components of neocolonialism? And what are some of the ways you try to, think about organizing, politically educating to confront neocolonial regimes, around the world?
Yeah, I mean, so neocolonialism, it's really just the latest way of kind of masking what's going on. I think it's part of the reason why it's hard to organize against is because it's hard to see like who the actual enemies are under neocolonialism. You're often presented as individual, or you're presented with these individual leaders, and you might point to them and say like, oh, in the context of Africa, it might be like, oh, we have bad leaders in Africa. That's a very common refrain. Like the problem with Africa is like we have bad leaders, we have like corruption. It's like these things are all true, but the problem is neocolonialism. It's that a lot of Africa is still under control of Europe. And so in this sense that when we're organizing against it, I think one of the first things is to really understand, once again, like what is the framework that we're working under? I mean, I think I only watched the first part of your chat with Ori about counterinsurgency, but I kind of was thinking about this in the shower that in some aspects, neocolonialism is a counterinsurgent mode on like a national scale. And so that's what it makes it so hard to fight against. I think even in terms of the US context, when you mention neoliberalism, it's almost the same thing. We think in the US, you might go and vote for mayors or governors or even presidents. And you might have you might think like, oh, these are the people that are like calling the shots of the nation. But because the US is also, the state is there just to ensure that profits for the largest corporations, profits for the imperialists will continue to flow. So in that sense, we don't have democracy in the West, in a lot of the world, because all our governments are at the behest of the imperialists. I think and I'll contrast that to what I saw in the AES. When we were traveling to AES, if you asked a lot of people in the AES, what were the problems? Like, what's the problem of the AES? Their first answer was the imperialists. They said the French got to go. And I think having that focus in your mind of knowing like these are who the enemies are, like wherever you are, really you should be looking at the imperialists, the capitalists, like these are the enemies. If you start approaching it from that angle, I think it might be easier to see past the subterfuge of neoliberalism and neocolonialism.
Yeah, I'll just really quick follow up. And neocolonial, the crux of neocolonialism is giving the impression of change without anything actually changing, right? Because if the system, it's like in the liberals in the U.S., right? They'll be like, oh, Trump's in office. It's like, well, all the policy change that Trump is pushing was pushed under Biden. So, like, we have to understand that we have to change the whole system. You can't reform something that's working as it should. And the goal of neocolonialism is to wrap something up and present it as something different, but in essence, it's the same thing. So the U.S. in essence hasn't gone anywhere past slavery, genocide, and a dispossession of land. It's still that nation. It's still that foundation that it's built on. And we need something that is not that. And in the context of the Sahel and Africa, right? We need to look at what at the essence, what are you changing? Because we have these very rambunctious individuals that will talk to you about Pan-Africanism and uniting Africa. And Ruto in Kenya, what is he doing to unite Africa? Selling out other African nations? Investing in the exploitation of partnering African nations? Sending troops to Haiti to exploit African diaspora? What? I thought you were a Pan-Africanist. I thought you wanted to unite Africans. And so we have to understand, unless we're addressing the root causes of the issue and we're actively building something anti-imperialist, it's still imperialist. Unless it's anti-imperialist through the policies, through everything, then it's serving empire. And we just have to be very clear about that. You can't reform imperialism. It's imperialism. And it's the same thing with colonization, which is why, right, what's happening in the DRC with the building of the railway, it's they've always exploited the resources of African countries, and this is just the latest model of it. And they'll try to paint it real nice and say, we'll give people some jobs temporarily while also destroying the environment, while also putting the health of these workers, harming the health of these workers, while forcing forced labor, child labor. People will die, right? But it's supposed to be a good thing, right? Because we're helping them. We're helping these people. And we have to look past that and look at what in essence are they trying to build. And if it's not for the working class, if it's not people centered, like the Sahel is presenting to us, then it's not for us.
Yeah, thank you so much. So there's a lot of good stuff in the chat. So I'm going to actually bring some of their comments and questions in. First of all, shout out to Dr. Jared Ball. Good to see you. No, certainly not Ibram Kendi. But yeah. So anyways, so this question from Tony, I'll say my piece on it, and then if either of you want to add something on it too. I mean, so U.S. imperialism, or just imperialism, of which U.S. is the primary kind of global hegemon, right? Is the larger system of exploitation. It's the we could say it's the primary contradiction or whatever, but it's the system through which the global capitalist system functions and exploits the third world, the global south, Africa, so on. Neocolonialism, we might think of it as a form of that, or a tactic that U.S. imperialism can utilize, right? And so it's really becomes, obviously Kwame Nkrumah wrote about it. A lot of other folks have written about it as well. But the idea is basically that, during the anti-colonial movement, it became very difficult to just straight up prevent countries from gaining independence, right? And so then you say, okay, well, we'll give them, we'll allow them to have independence. Well, so not, it didn't always go that way. I mean, the Portuguese fought to the end, but um, but we want a government and a leadership that's going to continue to allow us to extract the resources or the labor that we need from these places, as easy as possible, basically. And obviously they use, Samir Amin talks about two legs of imperialism: the kind of political economic leg, and which includes, or sorry, the economic leg, and then the political leg, which includes also military as well. And so you pressure through these different points to be able to actualize it. But neocolonialism is, basically flag independence, but a government or a leadership that still serves empire, and the interests of major international capital corporations over the interests of the people within the country. And obviously, when you don't go that route, then you end up often being sanctioned and facing the military might and so on. So, some of it is not. It's one of those things. It's. I would say that's why it's a lesser. I don't want to say a lesser contradiction, but it's beneath imperialism, right? Because without imperialism, then countries wouldn't necessarily have that difficult choice that they have to make between, do we go along with this system and be compradors in this system, or do we try to buck the system and do something different and have to fight it on these different playing fields. So that's sort of what I would say about that question. I wouldn't want to differentiate these things, but think about one is a system, and the other one is kind of a tactic of that system. I don't know if either of y'all have ways that you think about this.
Yeah, so I think Nkrumah said that neocolonialism was the final stage of imperialism. So I don't really separate these, as you were alluding to. It's just it's really the tactic that it's how imperialism, it's the face that imperialism involved to present to Africa and much of the global South. It's just because the old ways of imperialism, as you were saying, that it became tactically too difficult to maintain imperialism using the old method. So imperialism evolved to present this face of neocolonialism on the African continent and elsewhere. So when I use the terms, I think of them interchangeably because it's neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is kind of the endpoint of imperialism. It's the face that we see. And I actually would flip what Tony said, his comment, or sorry, their comment on its head. It's that when Africa is free, then imperialism will die, right? The graveyard of Africa, or the graveyard of imperialism, is Africa. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we work to free the African continent, because the imperialist world, as we talk about the minerals in Congo now, we can talk about the minerals in Congo before. The wealth of Europe, the wealth of the US, the wealth of the imperialist world is built and is continuously built on Africa. And so freeing the African continent would mean that imperialism would have no more legs to stand on.
Right on. Also, Prudence. Yeah, I think that as I was saying, lesser contradiction. I think I was also realizing it's not a good characterization of it. I think, manifestation, I guess, is more what I would kind of think about in terms of the way I would see neocolonialism, manifestation of imperialism. All right. Francis, thank you for your support. I'm going to kick some of this over to the comrades. Somebody also mentioned, and I do want to raise this up, that there's a link to contribute funds to a member, Maurice, based in Congo, so we can move funds to solidarity leaders on the continent. So I'll send, some of what I can from what you gave, Francis, and I encourage other folks to do the same too. Thanks for the support. And let's see what else. This was a good question. So, curious why Western corporations need Rwanda and M23 to extract resources from the Congo instead of just going in directly through the current regime in power in the DRC. So, why not just use a comprador, regime within the DRC to get these resources? What seems to be the benefit of, investing in arms and Rwanda and these rebel forces in your view?
It's a really good question. I'm going to take a first crack at it, and then Conrad, you can follow up. And Conrad Obi had alluded to this in response to the prior. You can't do things the same way. It's about what front, right? Neocolonialism. It's about what's frontward facing. So you need an African face. You need an African to be the person that you can show, is doing the thing, so that you can use these divide and conquer tactics. But in reality, if we're looking right behind, and if we're following the money, the imperialists are very much involved in the destabilization efforts that are taking place. Colonization can't function, first of all, because it's not sustainable, but also, right, in changing its essence, it gives the impression that certain things have changed when in actuality they haven't. Right. So I think the backing of the rebel groups and the use of Rwanda is an exploitation tactic for specific individuals to make money. And where are these arms coming from? And and if we follow where the arms are coming from, and the military contracts and the movement of the military industrial complex, it helps us to understand that in order to have the destabilization of these countries, and in order to overexploit these countries, we need to be pushing through the military industrial complex, war, because war makes money. War makes money fast. It doesn't care if people are dying in the process. It just cares that it's making money, and people are making a lot of money. And Rwanda is just an active participant because specific people want to get that money. And the M23 are individuals that are being taken advantage of in this process because there's money, and there are not enough nation states that are backing up the DRC to stop this from happening. And it's a similar thing that we see play out in the context in different regions. For example, Palestine since 1948, right, has been occupied illegally by Israel. Where are the Arab nations? Except Yemen. Shout out to Yemen. Right? What does it say? And so again, I think in understanding the geopolitical context of things, we can't do things. The imperialists can't do things like they used to, and so they're looking for people that they can push to serve their needs, so that on the outward facing, it doesn't look the way that it used to look.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I would add on, it's a matter of convenience. And Rwanda is also fine with Rwanda, the government of Rwanda, whatever national bourgeois of Rwanda might exist, they're also fine with going in, taking the land by force, killing people, and extracting the minerals that way. In that sense, it's that force and brutality, especially because it's not necessarily white hands holding the gun. That also would mean that it's easier to sweep that under the rug as some ethnic conflict. You're going to get less resistance in the imperial core if you go that way. To actually do the extraction on a large scale in a meaningful way, or especially if you want to extract as much profit as capitalists want to do. It's either through essentially using slave labor, but that's not always the best look, especially for these Western countries who try to claim that they care something about human rights or even know what that is. Or you also need to put in a fair amount of capital. You need to actually invest to do these things. And so for a long time, if the minerals are coming out, the capitalists would have no reason to invest more. It's already almost slave-like conditions in some of these regions, how they're pulling out the minerals. They're getting the minerals, Rwanda's getting little money, the people there are being exploited, but that's the system as it works. If you look, the place that actually invests money and invests capital to kind of build out the extraction process is China. So even this Libre corridor that they're trying to build, part of it still depends on the Benegu Railway, which was just revamped by Chinese investment in Angola. The capitalists, they don't want to part with their money. They don't want to invest in anything to actually do stuff. They just want to take by force and by means. So Rwanda, M23, Kagame, it's more their style than actually negotiating and trying to extract that way.
Yeah, I would just add, and this is just like kind of speculation as well as just some of the people I talked to over the years, but Ali Kadri's work around the accumulation of waste and around thinking too about he basically just talks about, in order for the world capitalist system to function as it does, it requires an incredible amount of force. I mean, genocide is built into it, and part of it is just to beat down countries in the working class. And you think about a place like the Democratic Republic of Congo is so minerally rich that it, I mean, it literally could be the richest country in the world probably if it had, sovereign control over all of its resources and so on. So it might, it's probably a situation where just negotiating, if you weren't using, so much organized violence, is not, country would say, hey, we're going to nationalize this. We're going to, get our best share out of this, right? We're going to have good paying jobs and, nice infrastructure and all of this. And that does not suit the imperial core interests at all, right? And so, supporting instead various armed groups. And I mean, M23 being one, obviously, but we're talking about, this has been going on for decades. And, we're talking about millions of people who have been killed in the Congo. I mean, you look online and figures like 6 million come out, but it's probably like a lot of those are fairly old in terms of, you know, some studies I saw like in 2008, it had been, 5 million in the last 10 years or so. Right. And so we're just talking about just an industrial scale kind of slaughter that I think is just really difficult for us to imagine. Obviously, we can think about it in terms of what we've all seen so much of with Gaza, unfortunately, in the last 18 months or so, but on a much bigger scale over a longer period of time. So anyway, I think that that's probably one of the really important pieces of it too, is that it's not a scenario where just, if you didn't negotiate without all the force and the organized violence, or if you did negotiate without those things, then it might be tougher for the imperialists to actually get everything that they want at the kind of rates that they want and so on. And so that's the way that they go. um all right, other things. So we can address this quickly. I mean, I think we've kind of talked about this. What is a proxy war? But basically, it's a war in which the, so to say not a proxy war, right, would be a war where you have two nation states that are fighting each other. Lot of, if not most wars nowadays are proxy wars of some kind. I mean, I think about Syria, it's definitely there's a lot of proxies involved. You think about, um, you could argue even with Palestine, right, that Israel is more or less a proxy for U.S. interests, or it certainly serves a specific, role within U.S. imperialism. With Ukraine, certainly the NATO, there's the NATO and US element of what they would like. And then there's Russia, and um, so it's basically where the military forces that are fighting are not primarily of the kind of, um, I don't know. It's like the countries that want to fight each other fight through other forces, basically, or they're fighting over control of something else, right? And so, like with HTS in Syria, a lot of people would say, well, Turkey was the primary, funder, and so it's like, well, who is backing Turkey? Like, who's, and so it makes it complicated again because it's this question of who's benefiting, who's funding. But I guess the simplest way to think about it is like who's arming people and for what reason. And so I don't know if you all have a more sophisticated or simpler way to describe a proxy war than that.
No, I think,
Right.
yeah, just at the end, who are the hands in? It's like you have puppets fighting and you're looking at the hands in the puppets. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, all right. Got that. Just raise this up again. Definitely check the links, contribute. Um, Prudence also raised this question too of like when it was saying why go through Rwanda, that this is kind of what the current president in the DRC is trying to do, is to cut a deal directly and saying, hey, you can give us weapons and then we'll just give you the stuff, and so that's also, you know, it is another way that they can go. That's the challenge, is that there are other ways that they can go. Um, so I guess two things, because I think we've addressed most of the stuff in the chat. So one, just other ways. One, I guess anything else in terms of what you all are doing or trying to do and trying to think about in terms of your organizing in this moment, things that people can, support or get involved in. Yeah, and just more stuff in terms of, maybe we could talk about some of the stuff that is that you all shared for us to include in the show description. Yeah, ways people can support your work and the work you all are doing.
Yeah, I'll start out. So there's the comrade asked a question, and I'm gonna come back to it. Right, when we're trying to talk about like what's happening in Gaza, the DRC, and Sudan, foreign intervention in Haiti, right? In essence, we need to understand international solidarity, and the fact that we need to understand that everything that's happening in these countries is not exempt from what could happen to us, right? So the fact that there has been decades-long genocide happening in the DRC, and people continue to remain silent and continue to be unconscious consumers, right? I think is a problem. We need to create a sense of urgency as anti-imperialists, right? Take on the task of educating our people so that we are active participants in building an alternative outside of imperialism. And we have to stop being comfortable with the idea of genocide, because the reality is, as somebody that has been here for almost a year in Gaza, as someone that is aware of the genocides currently continuing to happen in Congo and Sudan, is that people are very much comfortable with the idea of genocide when it's not them. Because this is the most well-documented genocide in modern day history, and people are still just watching. Like, I don't need your eyes on Rafah. It's already destroyed because no one did enough. And we're having to evacuate. And people in the DRC are still in mines. Like, children are in mines dying, trying to get this cobalt to get people's phones running, and no one's stopping that. And so what are we normalizing to maintain our comfort at the expense of our people in the global South? And I would just push people to understand that when we're talking about the active ways in which the DRC continue to be exploited, that it demands a tangible response. What's happening is tangible, and we must end it through tangible, strategic ways. You all can discuss that offline, but we need to stop the not only the funding, so understanding, right, that Unilever, someone that Walter Rodney points to in his book, in the Underdevelopment Africa, is still in play and still exploiting Africa till this day, right? And so we have to understand the economics. And again, we look to a place like the Alliance of Sahelian States, and the fact that true Pan-Africanist leaders and true revolutionaries stand in solidarity with Palestine, because as Julius Malema of the EFF just pointed out in a speech, right? Africans are Palestinians and Palestinians are Africans, because at the end of the day, we face the same fate. If we don't all get together, we're gonna be destroyed, and we're gonna continue this vicious cycle. Or we can unify and accept the differences of our comrades, unify against the primary problem that's trying to distract us. And we need to stop these genocides, and we need to stop being comfortable with the idea of them. And now when we're talking about ways that we can do that, obviously it's going to be different, right? Congo is the heart of Africa. And not surprisingly, it's one of the most mineral rich. And so when we're thinking about ways to support, and our comrades have pointed it out, right? We have the Kwame Nkrumah fellowship that our comrade Maurice, who is on the ground in the DRC, this is a fellowship to support our comrade to build tangibly on the ground amidst the ongoing genocide with the Comité de Kinshasa, who you all can follow. But essentially, we're doing this fellowship to support our comrade in facilitating the organization of workers in Kolwezi, which is it's called the capital of the cobalt capital of the world, right? So our comrade is doing tangible things on the ground through this fellowship, and we need to be supporting our comrade and these Pan-Africanist projects versus, say, some INGOs that people might think of that will pop up on your feed that are very visible and visually, you know, they're doing things. But the reality is that a lot of these NGOs are taking your donations and putting them in administrative fees. It's not getting to the ground, to the people, to tangibly change the conditions that allow for that exploitation to happen. What we're trying to push for, and what the only things we should really be supporting as Pan-Africanists, is the building of Pan-Africanist projects in the motherland, and supporting them if we find ourselves in the diaspora. So again, tangibly support our comrade that is doing that will be building with and organizing workers in the DRC, and continuing to uplift and educate what is happening. Because again, I mean, Congo is called the silent genocide because millions and millions of people have been killed, and people still aren't talking about it. And so also follow us on social media. Abbas Imperialism, at Abbas Imperialism. We have a Substack where we write articles and push out information to keep people as up to date as possible. And just to convey the message, Fred Hampton, socialism is the people. We're trying to build a united Africa against imperialism, and this is our objective. We're actively trying to participate in the building of this through the coalition, and forever forward, siempre pa'lante. That's what I got to say. Free Palestine, free Congo, and free Sudan.
So the Substack, somebody asked, first of all, that's the correct GoFundMe I showed, right? Just making sure. Yeah, okay, cool. And that's in the show description. Also, this right here is, hang on, right there. This is the Substack. This is also in the show description as well. Yeah, absolutely. Obi, did you have something else you wanted to add? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to also add some context to the Kwame Nkrumah fellowship. So the idea is that we need organizers, we need Pan-Africanist organizers on the ground to be able to do the organizational work, right? So like a lot of times in Africa, there's just a lot going on where a lot of our organizers, they are having to work many different jobs or having to deal with a lot of the stressors in Africa, in addition to organizing. So the idea of this fellowship is this is the inaugural year. We want to do this every year to give funding to organizers on the ground so that they are able to have a means to organize a little more full-time, if not full-time. So in this case, Comrade Maurice is with the Comité de Kinshasa, as Libre mentioned. They're doing a lot of good work. Like, one of the work that they're doing is actually they're working on building a cooperative farm in the region. It was actually going to be closer to Goma until the fighting broke out, but it's been moved a little bit inwards. And the idea is not only to grow food, but also to kind of build a communal, like an egalitarian mindset, and do or education organization work around that. And so in this idea, we just want we feel like we need more people, more serious organizers on the ground in Africa to be able to dedicate more of their time to organizing our people in Africa, which is front line of imperialism. So I just wanted to make sure I gave some context of that. And were you able to drop the link in the chat for people who might not be able to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can do that. Awesome.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
As I'm doing that, a couple of other questions did come in. So this one, a company recently completed construction of the first cobalt refinery in the U.S. How do we expect this to change the nature of the U.S. government's dealings in the Congo? No.
We don't. We don't.
Yeah.
They're building. They're literally building the refinery so that when they build this railway, they can directly extract to the U.S., refine it, and then sell it back at a higher rate. It's playbook capitalism. And then they'll make the argument to a working class U.S. audience, right, that this is helping to facilitate economic growth in the country, when the U.S. is not sustainable, because under capitalism we're seeing constant crashes, right? So nothing sustainable about it. It's just marketing attempts by the U.S. to make itself look good for exploiting and continuing to fund a genocide in also Congo.
It's putting America first. No, I'm just kidding. All right.
That being said, also, we should change our mindset. We have to stop. People that have grown up in a Western context have to stop looking for solutions in the West. The global South at this point is offering far more examples of what we should be at least trying to do as people that want to call themselves imperialists, people that want to call themselves leftists, right? Colombia formed a coalition of leftist organizations that have different leftist ideologies to put forth candidates, and won an election in Colombia, something that we want to consider in other contexts, right? The AES is kicking out colonizers and taking back their land, something that colonies or places that are territories may want to consider. Again, there are far more examples in the global South of things we should be trying to build. We need to stop looking at the West as if it provides any type of good examples. The only good examples it provides is for exploitation of our people.
Amen. So this, I mean, you just listed some that we could probably include, but Alex asked, what keeps comrades Obi and Libre hopeful in these dark days? So we can wrap on this one, but I really have appreciated this conversation and appreciate you both for your time and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I can start. I think it's, for me, it's an easy answer. The AES has just been such a shining star for what to do, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to visit and see it in person and see the excellent work and that's going on there. I mean, so in terms of what we need to do, I think it's the seed of a future Pan-Africa, like a unified Pan-Africa. And the goal of Pan-Africanism, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, is to total unification and liberation of Africa under scientific socialism. And I see that seed there. That unification and liberation of Africa will free the world. Like, for me, there's no two cents about it. When I said, or when when Ture said, Sekou Ture said, graveyard of imperialism is Africa. Like, I believe it. I see the seed of a liberated Africa in the AES. I know that we need to work to expand that seed, and Africa will be free. All of us will be free, and we'll be free from imperialism. Sometimes people say free this place and that place. Like, we need to. What are we freeing ourselves from? Imperialism, right? So we'll be a unified Africa. We'd be able to stop any other genocides from happening. Palestine would be a single united Palestine, all the land back. Like, to me, that's what gives me hope. But also, that means we have to constantly work towards. We have to be in organizations because that's how we do our work, right? We can't do anything individually. I wouldn't be anywhere. I'm just a guy, but here in the organization, I feel like I can do so much. So join an organization fighting for liberation, connect with comrades in the global South, and let's free them all.
This is a difficult question for me to answer because I'm currently in a genocide. And I've become more pessimistic and more critical of the left movement, having seen the things that I've seen. That being said, the thing that brings me hope is the necessity of what we're fighting for and what's at stake if we don't. I've seen more dead bodies than probably most people have seen, and it's so normal. And the bombing and the drones and what's at stake, it's more than just humanity. It's the normalization of everything that I'm living. And that goes for places like Congo that don't get nearly enough attention, and Sudan, and IET, right? The pillar of independence, in my opinion. The thing that brings me hope is the fact that I'm surrounding myself with people that are uncomfortable enough to do something and to work with organizations to try to create a different world that is possible. And we know it's possible because we see these things tangibly being done in the Sahel. The Sahel also brings me hope as someone from the African diaspora, someone that comes from a nation that's still fighting against colonization. Like, the Sahel is a blueprint, and we need it because it is life or death, and in a very revolutionary sense. We can't lose hope because we're grounded in a deep feeling of love, and that's what keeps me here. But we have to act on that love, because love is not going to stop a bomb from killing us, and it's not going to stop a genocide from happening. That requires strategic organizing and the understanding that we have to stop using Western contexts to create our ideas of liberation. We're not fighting for peace. We're fighting for liberation. And that requires self-defense. So I need comrades that are watching this to do more, because not enough is being done. And if you're tired, just know I'm tired, and I'm organizing as bombs are falling and drones are falling and US tax dollars are being used to actively kill people here, and to kill people and fund projects in the Congo and in Sudan. These are all connected. And so my hope is that you all and we all can organize and create this world, and in the process support the things that are required as we move towards that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you both, and Libre. So much, I don't know. I'm very moved by this, and I mean, you all sent me this, and folks were like, Libre, who is currently in Gaza, and I was like, he can't actually be in Gaza right now, and here you are, and the work that you're doing. I just, yeah, I mean, it's inspiring, and I hope that everybody takes it as the kick in the butt to take what they're doing to another level. So I'm gonna just close out. Thank you so much. I'm gonna put oh, wrong thing. Hang on. I was gonna put the fundraiser back up just as we get ready to go out. Just again to just remind folks. Yeah, a few folks have contributed as we've been here. I'm going to make a donation as soon as I log off. And thank you all for the work that you're doing. And thank you for taking the time to have this discussion with me and with our audience. Solidarity to you both.
Solidarity. Thank you.
Solidarity.